This is Lou Bean with another episode of Burning Questions. I started the Blaze Project when I was still away from my home in Colorado, studying in Chicago, burning prairies, and doing invasive species work, mostly with loppers. And as graduation approached, I wrapped up the interactive museum exhibit and the elementary school visual installation, all of which I assumed would be the end of this project. But the prospect of what came next loomed. The closer I'd gotten to fire ecology through my practicum project, the more obsessed I'd become. But breaking into the world of wildland fire was intimidating, even as a lifelong outdoor recreator and working in a physically and historically masculine job as a carpenter at the time. I took a risk and I moved home and joined the Conservation Corps Women's Affinity Chainsaw Crew, and it changed my life. I found leadership and a crew culture so safe and motivating that I was able to gain the skills and confidence in myself that I needed to move into a co-ed alumni fuels and burn crew that winter and a summer with the Forest Service as a wildland firefighter. Only then to come back and lead the women's chainsaw crew myself to try to provide that same level of support and transformation that I had been offered. And the rest is history, moving around and working with good fire and chainsaws and finding my own path. But I don't know where I would have even begun without this foundation of investment of time and care into me as a young professional who is non-traditional to the field. In this episode, I have not one, but two interviews in one today, coming hot off the heels of an incredible weekend hosting our third Buckin Babes Women's Plus Affinity Chainsaw Workshop. I've put together so many Blaze Project events and classroom visits in Colorado, Illinois, and Georgia now, but nothing holds a candle to the special place this Red Wing workshop that I have the privilege of helping to facilitate holds in my heart. I love making the land management knowledge that I'm often sharing in a digital, PowerPoint, or printed format tangible and actionable and empowering and community building. It has been incredibly motivating to connect with like-minded organizers like my two guests today who share a web of common interests of mine in fire, conservation, agriculture, and equity.
Zara, she, her pronouns. I am based in southern Colorado. Kind of not in the postcard picture perfect Colorado that people think of. I'm on the plains. I rally hard for the plains. We have a totally different topography here, but by day I'm a agriculture organizer, so I organize with farmers and ranchers, and it hits close to home because my background is in farming and ranching, and I live on a farm and a ranch, and I participate in farming and ranching here. We do direct-to-consumer beef and lamb and vegetables. There's a CSA, but I work with National Young Farmers Coalition as a field organizer, and we work towards equity and agriculture and land access. My background in getting close to like more fire organizing and chainsaw stuff is honestly having to be evacuated multiple times and feeling like I'm out of my depth and trying to be like, instead of being like reactionary, being more prepared, and just happen to be in a good collection of folks, aka you all on this call.
Whoa, cool to hear all of that, and thank you, Lou, for having us here. My name is Erin Sheridan, she, her pronouns, and I am also in Colorado, in South Central Colorado at Red Wing, and I grew up in Northern California in Plumas County, where ranching and logging were definitely in the background of my life, but I didn't think that I would be the one necessarily holding the tools or being a part of any of that kind of work until I went to Cal Poly and joined the timber sports team because I learned how to use chainsaws and hand tools for fun and for competition, and then translated that into working on Sawyer crews and working on a bunch of different types of farms in California, Alaska, and now Colorado. And it's been really cool to get into ranching and see how we still need to do these large landscape level fuel management projects, just bringing good fire back. And so that has been driving my day to day.
So we all know each other from various different organizing things, but we have all three been brought together via Buckin Babes, and I think it would only be right for Erin, who is the original person who came up with the idea of Buckin Babes, to kind of explain just the nuts and bolts of what the Buckin Babes workshop is.
So this is just a workshop where you learn how to use a chainsaw, the mechanics, the safety, and then after day 1, getting more into that landscape level application through technical chainsaw use, including limbing and felling and pile burning, and talking about home ignition zone and really all the reasons why you would need a chainsaw in your life.
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite things about this workshop is that there are no shortage of online webinars and community meetings that you can go to talk about the home ignition zone, to talk about home hardening, to talk about doing fields management on your property. But there are very few opportunities, at least in our state here in Colorado, to extend it into time spent on learning those active skills that a lot of us have felt excluded from or feel intimidated from learning. So I think the really special thing about this class too is like we go into those things, we talk about the applications, we give you diagrams and things like that, but you know, you're on almost a laboratory of a landscape and a place for you to sort of like learn in a similar field type. Obviously, Colorado doesn't have a huge amount of biodiversity, and a lot of our landowners, even those coming from northern New Mexico, have very similar landscapes to us with the pinyon and juniper and the cottonwood riparian areas and stuff. And so we have this laboratory for them to come in and test all these skills out in a place where they can always be asking questions. And I feel like that's a really unique thing when it comes to especially those trainings that are targeted at landowners. A lot of people who maybe want to go into the industry itself and do something like wildland fire, they're going to get those opportunities to practice those hands-on skills with chainsaws, to do fuels on our public lands. But we're still 60% private land in Colorado. And those landscapes also still need that management and people who know how to manage them, not only for health of the forest itself, but also for health and safety of the humans doing it. So I think that's one of the really unique things about this workshop. But in addition to that too, it is creating that space for people who are coming in feeling like this is not something they have previously been invited to do. So I was wondering, Zara, if you would want to talk about like how do we actually go about creating a place where people feel welcome to make mistakes and learn when they're maybe approaching the workshop with a certain amount of like trepidation or just general nervousness.
You need all these perspectives and specialties to come together, and honestly just, you know, the vibes to make a good space that feels safe, that feels knowledgeable, that feels fun and like welcoming, and identity is wrapped up in that as well. Like Lou, like having a genderqueer folk like be the like instructor for this workshop is so important, and something I'm like really proud of in this rural space, because we're super rural, and this last workshop was mostly queer, and I feel really proud of that as an organizer, because it's really hard to create a space that it feels safe and welcoming, and it felt huge that people felt like they could show up as their authentic selves in a place that's, you know, 2 hours from a major city. I feel really proud about that with Buckin Babes and hope that it continues to feel like that. I think having a good team is pretty much key. You know, and not being patronizing, and that's all this stuff sounds pretty simple, but just knowing that we're all here to learn, and like that is the base level, is just that we're all here and curious. And if that's the base level, it's kind of like a beautiful common ground that everybody has. I remember participants said something that really touched me, because they were a little bit quieter, and then they said something along the lines of, "This is the least judgmental space I've ever been a part of," and that meant a lot to me. And because this could be a huge judgmental space, you know, it's a big machines, and so I'm really glad that that's been cultivated, and I just attributed it to y'all.
I think, like, as somebody who's been on affinity crews through the Conservation Corps and been in other, like, training spaces that are also sort of affinity for various different identity groups, I think that something that I've learned is that just because you get a bunch of people in a room who have similar experiences because of who they are in the world doesn't necessarily mean that you're creating a welcoming learning space, and that those things still have to be really intentional. And I think that like we've created something really awesome, and I also too like want to mention too how much our participants that come to the class. It's not just the facilitators who who are creating that experience, but our participants do an amazing job of like playing into that feedback loop, and it creates this awesome, extremely encouraging environment where, you know, like learning how to use a chainsaw, especially when it comes to like things like hinge construction and match cuts, like you start getting away from just like the very basic functions of the saw, and you realize how hard it can be to like actually master some of these skills. And we never expect anybody to walk away from a weekend being perfect with these things. It's an iterative process. We invite them to like come back to be part of these communities for volunteer fuels mitigation days, or to plug in wherever they're from. But just to get that first step to be in a space that feels welcoming, I think is really important. And just mentioning too that, yeah, like it's not inherent to the fact that it's like a bunch of women and genderqueer people. It's a process of intentionality. And also too that like around chainsaw work, but around all like hazardous work, I think that I also am always thinking about how all people are affected by gendered expectations around work as well too, and about competency and about the freedom to make mistakes. And I don't think that that's something that's like unique to people like women or genderqueer people who are maybe coming into things that are related to ranching or wildland fire or any of these things. I think that all people feel this pressure to like be perfect on the first try, and maybe even some like men may feel it more strongly because it is like masculine quote unquote work. They may feel the need to perform well on the first try, and like also like struggle with this feeling of not feeling as if they are allowed to make mistakes or ask questions openly. So I think that by cultivating these skills in these affinity spaces, because even after being in this realm for a while now, I still feel sometimes like I can't speak up, or I can't make mistakes, or when I'm at work. So I think like coming back to this space, it helps me feel safe going back into my workplace even, and meeting other people with the same kind of energy and humanity that we cultivate in this workshop. So that's what I'm learning and getting out of it as a facilitator. And I was wondering, Erin, too, like as somebody who sort of had the original spark of this idea, like how do you feel like this workshop has evolved for you over time, and where would you like to see it go as we are offering more of it in the future?
Yeah, well, I was just going to go off of something you said too, Lou, when we were talking about this last weekend at Buckin Babes, is that the expectation is not that you create this separate working group out in the real world, but that this can be more of a kickstart to developing these skills. Like I know personally, using a chainsaw and heavy equipment and some of these more technical, potentially intimidating resources and tools was intimidating, and took a long time to get where I'm at now, where hopefully this is a fire hose of information in the best way, where you get to do so many things, you get to meet so many people that are doing similar or totally different work, and that you can really then apply it to your next adventure, whether that's your home, your work, all the above. But discussing what this will look like in the future, this should not be rare. This should not be this novelty experience. Obviously, we want to keep inviting so many folks to Buckin Babes, and we're hosting 2 workshops a year now for a reason. But I hope that this can be adopted through other organizations, particularly across the West, where I have more connections, but just across the country and hopefully across the world. It's exciting to see people wanting to get back to developing these hard skills, and then the soft skills that go with that. How do we organize events where we can lean on each other for sharing these skills and resources, and land to get to practice this on? So I think there's a real opportunity for facilitating these kinds of workshops where we say, hey, you 5 have these skills. Let's create another workshop in a new place that can invite folks to learn chainsaw work, prescribed burning, all the above. So that's my hope for Buckin Babes and just the future of skill development.
Absolutely. Like we want to see all of these skills become like as accessible as possible to everybody, because we need all hands on deck to manage, problems with woody encroachment, with fuel buildup on our landscapes from fire suppression. Like, we need everybody to get on board. So definitely not wanting to see these things like get kept behind specific paywalls or in specific regions and geographies, or even us being, the only people who are allowed to teach a workshop like this. Like, we've talked extensively about how we want to be able to connect with other people and empower them to be able to bring this out. Something that Zara said as we were wrapping up this last weekend is that these opportunities are supposed to be like veins, right? It starts here, but then every single person who it touches, it branches out and touches another person in a place that we physically can't go. And I was also going to ask Zara too, especially because you work with a lot of younger farmers and ranchers, which, as you often clarify, is qualified as anybody who's under the age of 65, which is the average age of producers in this country right now. Where do you see private landowners and ranchers fitting into the broader picture of fire resilience and land management right now?
We were at a meeting recently where we were just talking about how we hope that, like, our home state that we're in, Colorado, is going to be interested in doing more prescribed burns. And that's because literally 2 days ago, we were helping our neighbors evacuate for a fire, and it touched our pasture land in an already dry year. So this fire took away grass from cattle, and that's, the existential dread that is already being felt by not having water this year is like the elephant in the room with farmers and ranchers right now. Is just, we either only talk about it or we just aren't going to go there today. So I think fire, if we're not having regular healthy fires, they are just out of control and really scary. And so I guess what I would like to see is that I would like to see a new relationship with fire. I think, fire affects everybody in the way that if it comes through and ruins your home, that's emotional and physical thing you have to deal with. The problem for farmers and ranchers is when it comes through, it's their home, but it's their livelihood, it's their identity, and also their profession that could go away potentially, and has happened before. And this also makes me think of different relationships we have with disaster. And as an organizer, I'm always trying to figure out resources and ways to, if people have gone through disaster, what do you do? And we've gone through disaster in a couple different ways, and you're so much in recovery mode that some resources or disaster aid you have to apply within 30 days. And it's you're still recovering in 30 days. And so how do I streamline this information? Farm Aid has a really good resource where you can plug in all of where you are, what you have, and they'll show you what you qualify for. So that was my favorite resource I found. But so much of 60% of Colorado's private land, and I'm sure a bunch of those are huge ranches, down the road we have one that's over 87,000 acres, and there's a lot of ranches that are owned by the state that are that large. And so it just gives me a little bit of hope also when I see ag and state policy. And Colorado, it's changing rapidly, which gives me a lot of hope in ways that I've never felt before. So I feel invested in I'm Appalachian, so I'm not used to trusting the feds necessarily, but in this case, if there are policies that are here to help us with land access, there's a new bridge loan thing that's coming to the state, and that is actively to try to get folks to be able to get ag valued price instead of market value price, which is happening because of a lot of out-of-state landowners, etc. Anyway, this is getting rambly, but I think there's a lot of different ways that everyone can work together, and specifically in Colorado, I have a lot of hope for. But the West, a lot of people are already doing prescribed burns, and places that you wouldn't expect. I was on a call with some folks in Nebraska, and they have to do it because of all their cedar they have, and I'm all right, Nebraska, yes, tell me more. So that stuff is exciting.
I think that sometimes a lot of people who are maybe from urban areas and don't have a relationship with rural land, but maybe they recreate in rural areas, don't necessarily understand the value of keeping working lands working because of this concept of habitat connectivity. We need those places between, say, like a lot of the highway and then the mountains. Everything in between there is often cattle land and stuff like that. So, like, while there's room in the conversation for, like, how can farmers and ranchers be maybe changing their processes on their land, just in the fact that we keep that land undeveloped, keeping out things like roads, keeping out things like suburban sprawl, all of these things have huge benefits in just keeping that habitat connectivity there, because animals cannot exist in a vacuum. Ecosystems cannot exist in a vacuum. We need that connectivity with our public lands as well too. So helping people stay on land, and when they pass away or land changes hands, we want to make sure that that land stays working land as well too, or in some sort of like land trust or conservation easement or something. But Erin, I want to invite you to speak on, you're working at Red Wing Ranch right now, which I would consider to be one of those places that's really striving to change those processes and try things in a different way, in addition to the use of prescribed fire. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit on what Red Wing's doing right now to reimagine what running cattle in Colorado looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. We practice managed grazing. We would call ourselves regenerative ranchers, where, like I said, those practices that we're doing are very thoughtful, both for ecological reasons and profit reasons. We can't have a business if we can't be there tomorrow, but also we need everything that we're working in to also be there tomorrow. So we have a lot of metrics that we set for ourselves in the beginning of the year and say who's in charge of those action items, what are those action items, and what are our like ultimate goals, and that revolves around increasing plant coverage and reducing soil coverage. We want to host 3 prescribed burns. We want to be able to go to 3 different workshops, and ultimately all of that is getting back to the livestock, the people, and the business, and really caring for each other and the land, and wanting to create a space where we can learn with others, because Fiona, Sophia, and I are also all first generation, and I think it's really exciting that we have chosen to get into agriculture and make this our career. And so doing that in a way that maybe challenges historical norms but also embraces tradition is so exciting. We want to help neighbors at Brandon's. I want to get better at riding a horse, all of those like more traditional components, but still how can we bring cattle in and manage them the best that we can for the land that we're working in. We're doing managed grazing. We're women owned and operated, and just adaptability is the name of the game. That's something that we pride ourselves in, and I think we saw that with Buckin Babes. It's not stressful to shift exactly what we're doing because we already have embraced there is no one size fits all, and that we see that through the lens of grazing, through wildfire, through workshops and education and everything else that we do at Red Wing. So it's been really exciting to just challenge ourselves and the typical norm of how can we make a business run but still get enough sleep and reach our own personal goals every day.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, I love what you said about keeping tradition in this, because it's so not traditional in the way that gender binary in ranching, like women and anybody else that's not a male in traditional ranching have been excluded. There's like still brandings around me where unless you're a man, you're not invited. And so I feel like sometimes we think of things like in the past, but they're very present, especially in these older, more traditional spaces. So I love that it's like, what if we take tradition and put our own spin on it? You know, like we love raising animals, but it doesn't have to be done the way, yeah, it's only been done in the past, 100 some years. Still relatively fresh, ready to be remolded.
Totally. And I think that as much as there's a lot of mythology around farming and ranching, I often like to think about my great grandfather who was born during the Dust Bowl and was like an infant during the Dust Bowl, back when we didn't understand anything about the soil. And, he grew up and later became a producer himself. And was on the soil conservation board during a period of time where we were just starting to understand that like the soil is like living. It's not just dirt. There's like a bunch of stuff going on there that's been enabling us to like pull a livelihood out of it. And so I think that there's this sense that we were all like living in this one way, and there's like this fixed moment in time where ranching was one particular thing. But I think like playing into the dynamic nature of human desire to learn and our curious nature, and then our desire to like improve things over time is only going to benefit us as the climate changes. Using that curiosity and that sense of wondering how we could always be pushing ourselves to do better and embracing our dynamic nature as a human species in the face of change, I think is going to be vital to continuing to exist alongside these ecosystems. And I think that coming together for a workshop like Buckin Babes, getting everybody physically in the same place to invest in learning a new skill and getting together to be hopeful as a group about our relationship with the land as the climate changes is huge.
Yeah, looking people in the eye is really important.
Mm-hmm.
We're so virtual these days. It's like we need to touch grass and like see humanity in each other. It's like a lot of work to put on a workshop, but it also just fills you up so much. I feel like I would be remiss also just thinking about, this is maybe a little bit of a different topic, but thinking about how colonialism has shaped agriculture and fire relationships, and how like new this is, but these landscapes have been around for thousands of years and people have worked them, and fire has been a totally different relationship until the past like 150 years. So we are really just a little blink in time, and I feel like the goal is to like get back to how fire was. I mean, it's gonna look super different because we're super developed now, but I just want to re-ground us that it's not a new idea.
Absolutely. That is a very good point. So we are at about a half an hour. So if you guys both want to make a plug for anything you'd like to plug, workshop or organizing wise.
Sure, yeah. Well, Red Wing, we have another Buckin Babes in October. We have scholarships thanks to young farmers. So come to Buckin Babes. We're super excited to have more of you there. We also looking at our whole toolbox of how we can manage these lands. Chainsaws and prescribed burning and all of that is one piece, and then managed grazing and effective stockmanship, where we're utilizing how we run cattle or sheep or whatever that is in a really intentional way. And so we also have Move 'em Right. Yeah, stick with it. You can follow Red Wing. You can also follow me, Crosscut Cowgirl, because I think there's going to be more stuff coming down the pipeline with these awesome folks on the call. We're excited to be offering more opportunities, and yeah, get in there.
At Young Farmers, we have a water series coming up, which will be very relevant and specific to water in the West. We'll be having different folks come on and speak to that, and then I'm running a disaster series, which will be about resources. It'll be about fire. It'll be about planning for drought. It's still a little bit evolving, but again, all of these specific to disaster, it does come from a personal place of experiencing it. So I'm like, how do I retroactively plan? So hopefully it's helpful to folks. And then in June, we're gonna have a Juneteenth film film series. So leading up to Juneteenth, there'll be some cool films that we'll be screening that you can get access to through Young Farmers. My email is zara@youngfarmers.org. And I'm really excited. Some of the films only came out with Sundance, and so I'm like, ooh, we're gonna watch some cool films and hopefully get some panels. And personally working on this pesticide bill to get pesticides out of water, out of seed coatings, a super niche topic, but I guess I'll just plug that, like, if you have any organizing ideas in the West, but also specifically in Colorado, like, please hit me up, because I mean, we can just make things happen, you know, in community. And I like Buckin Babes. I feel like Erin had this awesome idea, and then you just sit down and it's like, wait, we can do that 100%. Let's do it. Like, what? Let's do it right now. Why would we not? So that's like the coolest thing about good friends and good folks who are like ready to push things forward. So please give me ideas and like, let's collaborate. Yeah, I'm so excited.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess just to wrap up, like, I want to thank you guys so much for taking time to speak with me today, but just in general, thank you for being friends of mine, because I think that is what ultimately is going to make all of this work very sustainable over the long term. Is not that, you know, agencies or relationships between professionals that are strictly professional are gonna save our lands, but this like uniquely like human connection that can keep us trucking into the future as we try to solve some of these extremely complex issues. So thank you guys so much.
Oh my god.
Thank you guys right now.
If we could do this 12-hour Monday straight, it's still